Hello and welcome to Strides and Paces. I'm Trish, and usually we have Addie. Addie's not with us. This is episode 8, where we'll be discussing disability representation in media and business with our special guest. If you're a fan of the show, please follow us on Patreon at patreon.com/Coach Trish. Just like it sounds, Coach Trish. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Lisa Cox, a TEDx speaker, award-winning author, and internationally recognized thought leader. Lisa brings over 25 years of advertising experience and recently received the Silver Stevie Award for Female Thought Leader of the Year. Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks very much, Trish. Really great to be here.
Before we dive deep, here's our fun opening question. What's the most memorable disability representation fail that you've seen in advertising?
Oh, unfortunately, there have been a lot. There are far too many, unfortunately, in movies, in advertising as well. But having worked in advertising, I pay particular attention to those in advertising. I suppose there are lots of stereotypes to choose from. Now, because I didn't have this question in advance, I'm afraid it's going to take a little while to think about it. I know there was a juice advertisement a while ago. Sorry, because of my brain injury. This is what happens when you work with someone with a disability who has a brain injury. Journalists, take note when you need to throw questions in advance. This is why you need to do it, because people who have brain injuries sometimes.
Hey, you know what? That's part of the show. That's part of the show. Seriously.
I can give plenty of examples in I know there's one particular example in business in general. There was a really large international brand who I won't name. I wrote articles about it, and they were so proud of themselves because they had employed over 150 people with disabilities, and the CEO was out there beating his chest and proudly talking about it, and everyone was there making such a big deal and fanned her about how they'd employed all these people with disabilities. And I thought to myself, that sounds really sus. I'll dig a bit deeper. So did a little bit of research online and poked around, and fair enough, all of those people with disabilities had been employed in the factory, and that is great for some people with disabilities. I don't want to poo-poo that. That's fantastic. But where were those jobs in the workforce, in finance, in PR, on board, in senior positions, all those sorts of things, in advertisements, in marketing campaigns, because this particular brand does a lot of advertising and marketing. And there was none of that. And it's this idea that people with disabilities are only capable of working in entry-level positions and should be grateful for any opportunity they get. And that's really something we need to look beyond.
No kidding. I hear you. I wrote a piece, I don't know, a couple of years ago about people with disabilities. We have leadership skills too. Hello, But a couple of years ago, it really fell on deaf ears. Maybe now make it a little more attention. Your recent Umbrella article, "My legs don't work, but my credit card does." It highlighted the huge market, the market that advertisers are ignoring. What inspired you to write that piece?
I suppose when I first acquired my disabilities over 20 years ago now, what really stood out to me, I was new to the disability sector, and even though I knew and grown up around people with disabilities, I was a new activist, and I was following in the footsteps and wheel treads of some incredible people. But there was this charity model And I'd spent many, many years as a businesswoman in boardrooms where some of the key decision makers about who and what was being shown in advertising in business, those people, what interested them most was the figure at the bottom of a profit and loss statement. Yes, disability inclusion is so, so important for society because it's a nice thing to do, but that wasn't enough to get those people over the line. So we needed to look at things from another perspective, from another point of view. Now, it's certainly not necessarily the nicest way to go about it, but if that's what gets us over the line, then let's talk about the business side of disability. Let's talk about the economic and financial benefits of the disabled consumer, because bloody hell, my legs don't work well, my credit card does. Now, this is not to say we're all going to drive around in Ferraris tomorrow. That's not about it at all.
Yeah.
That's not it at all. It's just that we buy frozen yogurt and peas and all the normal things. We're everyday people as well. And we are consumers who need to be valued by businesses, because that has flow-on effects to how the general population sees us. So that's what that comment was all about. So we're worth $18 trillion, I think. That's people with disabilities, plus our friends, family, colleagues, supporters, and at last count, but that figure is always changing and always rising. So bringing it back to sort of the business case, and it's the consumer model and the business model, they're sort of the recent trends from an academic perspective. That's what they've been called. But looking more at those rather than just this charity model of disability, that's, it's a nice thing to do. Yes, it absolutely is. But if history has taught us anything, decades and decades of, yes, it's just a nice thing to do. Yes, it's just a nice thing to do. That wasn't working. We needed to take a different perspective.
Yeah.
We needed a different tact.
And there are huge
There are. Yes, there absolutely are. So you can have both. You can do a really, really great thing for society and make a profit at the same time.
Lisa, so as a disability affairs officer at Media Diversity Australia, what changes have you observed in your tenure?
Right. So the changes I have seen are small, and the changes I would like to see are great. So the changes I have seen are around the language being used and the way people with disabilities are being represented in media, and not only the way we're being presented on screen. That includes the number of disabled journalists who are on screen and telling stories, but also the way people with disabilities are being spoken about. So one really, really small example is that instead of referring to me as wheelchair bound or confined to a wheelchair, you would say Lisa is a wheelchair user, or Lisa uses a wheelchair, or just say Lisa is in a wheelchair. And you might think, oh, that's semantics, it's no big deal. But over years and years and years and years, if somebody hears constantly, every day after day after day, so-and-so is confined to a wheelchair, wheelchair bound, confined bound, that builds up this idea in their head that wheelchairs are burdensome, cumbersome, that wheelchairs take away freedom. And for me personally, and I know a lot of people with disabilities feel this way, wheelchairs give us so much freedom and independence. They are anything but burdensome. And so we really need to take that language away, because it's so harmful to the disability community, not just for wheelchairs, of course, but let me think of another one. Suffering from. I'm not suffering from a disability. I'm suffering maybe from chronic pain or a migraine or something like that. Everyone's different. Everyone's individual, of course. I can't speak for everyone, but I'm not suffering from a disability or a wheelchair. I'm proud to be a part of the disability community. They're wonderful, but it's certainly not something I'm suffering from. So the media industry is so powerful, and they have the ability to shape and reshape attitudes and public perceptions. So that's what we're trying to do at Media Diversity Australia, and what some advocates are doing around the world.
Beautiful, beautiful. When you say suffering from, what I think of is suffering from discrimination.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Racism, discrimination, unconscious bias, all that crap.
Yeah. I smiled and laughed when you said that the wheelchair gave you independence, because I still remember the first day that I had to use a cane. I still remember, and it was really difficult. But I saw a woman at a support group meeting. I saw this woman everywhere she went, in the door, in coming in, going out to the bathroom, everything. She walked with her arm through her husband's, and he had to go with her everywhere. And that day I decided the cane was going to be not a symbol of disability, but it was my symbol of independence. And so, the wheelchair, I can totally feel you where you're saying, it gives you the freedom, right?
That's right. I suppose what people need to understand are the flow and effects of something as small as people might think it's just a few words in a media headline. But those words, day after day, year after year, decade after decade. So I go through the shopping centre, people see me in my wheelchair, they look at me with pity and they go, "Oh, you poor thing." No, I'm not poor. There are people starving on the other side of the world with no clean drinking water. I feel sorry for them, not for me. So those words that they've heard day after day, year after year, that's why they feel sorry for me. So those words have power, and that's why we need to change them.
Absolutely. The words have power. Let's talk about practical, cost-effective strategies for entrepreneurs wanting to make their business more inclusive. Because we talked about, a little bit about the benefits, but there's really, how do small business people get from, because our audience is mostly entrepreneurs with disabilities, as well as businesses that are wanting to grow their inclusion factor, which I call their inclusion factor. You work with coaches, business builders, show it's more affordable than many think. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so there's I suppose understandable in some ways, there's some misconception that to do inclusion or to make something disability inclusive is going to be really expensive and cost all sorts of crazy money, and you're going to have handrails everywhere and ramps, but that's not the case at all. So if you look at something like a website, and I can speak to this firsthand because I've just started with my website, making it inclusive. I certainly can't say everyone needs to have a disability inclusive website that can be read by people who are vision impaired, when I haven't got one of my own. So I had my website redone by an expert who specializes in making websites accessible. So I'm not a tech person, and I certainly can't talk about the specifics of what he did, but certain things like color contrasts. So I have vision impairment. I'm over 25% blind. So reading grey writing on a white background is incredibly difficult for me and a lot of other people with vision impairment. So that's something that costs no money to fix. Somebody can go into their website now and change the color. Or the font size or something else. There are lots and lots of changes that you can make to something like a website. There are all sorts of things that you can do. That Kosh's Business Builders website that I mentioned, You can perhaps link to that in the show notes if you like.
That would be great. That would be great. Awesome, awesome. How can entrepreneurs with disabilities leverage their unique perspectives in their work? Any theories on that?
Yeah, continue creating content if you can. And I say that knowing that everyone has their limits, and just pumping out a heap of free content isn't everyone's is up to everyone's cup of tea. So providing content, you having a disability makes you an expert in that. People want to learn from you. Something that I didn't mention before, that what business people can do to make their businesses more disability inclusive. Learn from the disability community. Ask the disability community. Don't assume you know what we need or how you can make it better. Speak to people within the community. Read our blogs, read our articles, etc. Listen and learn from us. Run a focus group if you want to. Speak to us, interview us. And people within the disability community, if you do have something to share, consider writing for your local business magazine, top tips to whatever, if you have something to share, if you think it will be of value.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that great advice, Lisa. Content is king, they say. Yeah. So what common misconceptions do businesses have about marketing to people with disabilities?
I think they assume that we're all a monolith. They assume that we're all the same. We all have the same values, opinions, think and drink and eat the same things and do the same things. That we're all white, able-bodied, heterosexual people in wheelchairs, but we're absolutely not. I have plenty of disabled friends, and we all disagree with each other all the time. And even though some of us are all in wheelchairs and have the same diagnoses, we're completely different in so many other ways and have totally different political ideas and values and all sorts of other things. So, and that's where it's really important to do your research and understand, just like you would a non-disabled client base. Do your research, understand your demographic, do your focus groups, all of those sorts of things that you would do with a non-disabled client base, because 20% market share, we're not just talking about a small drop in the ocean. 20% market share is huge. And that's what you're essentially leaving on the table by not including people with a disability.
I like to tell small business owners, I'd like you to stand at the door of your business today, and every fourth person you turn away. Every fourth person, I want you to say, you cannot come in here today. I don't want your money. And the business owner would say, well, I'll be leaving all my profit on the table. Well, there you go. That's what you're doing right now. You're turning away every fourth person. And the other theory, Lisa, is in the United States and Canada, early statistics now are showing that up to 50% of our population, up to actually more than 50% of our population lives with some kind of chronic condition.
That's correct.
And those chronic conditions can all qualify as disabilities, assuming that they are disabling. Okay.
Yes.
But that means that never mind 20% or 25% here in North America, it's really more than 50% of our population requires some kind of accommodation from time to time. You know, we all have, half of us, every second person, you know, if you don't have a chronic illness or a disability, you look on one side or the other. One of those two people is definitely going to have something that they have to deal with every day, you know? And so those numbers, I think, are really underrepresenting the people,
That's
those of us
exactly right.
out there.
And I think the last stat that I read was 80% of disabilities are invisible. So neurodivergence and things play into that. And of course, not all people who are neurodivergent want to be classified as disabled. So it's nuanced, and we won't get into that right now. But the point of the matter is that if people are looking out for who are the disabled customers, don't just look out for people in wheelchairs like me. They might just
Exactly.
look quite normal and not have any signs of disability with a cane or a wheelchair or a walker or anything like that. But this also leads to another problem. So, not necessarily a problem, but so many people with disabilities and health conditions and other neurodivergence aren't disclosing or sharing their disability or condition for fear of stigma and shame and all of those sorts of things, because of this idea that society has created around disability, that it is something to be ashamed of, which is a shame.
Which is a shame. Yeah.
It's a shame.
Yeah. Stigma is just so destructive.
Yes. You asked me before, what are some bad advertisements that I've seen, and I had a complete mind blank, I'm afraid. But I realise now that a lot of the ones we see here in Australia, I don't necessarily want to say, oh, these people are doing it wrong, because I want to anyone having a go, unless it's really, really bad, at least they're having a go, and it's better than nothing. So I think slamming people who are doing it wrong is not necessarily helpful, because at least they're trying. But one of the problems that does happen is that when it's only white heterosexual, the same sort of monolithic disabled person every single time. Because the disability community, as you know, is so diverse, but there's no intersectionality. So within that disabled representation, we do need to see some diversity reflected.
Yeah, that diversity is so important.
Yeah, people with disabilities have all sorts of disabilities. They are queer, they are of colour, they are all sorts of things.
Exactly. And every single marginalized population there is, that they call minorities, every single one of those sectors has 25 to 50% of their population lives with some kind of health condition. Okay, so those numbers represent all of those populations, right? And so, you know, if you're of a mind not to include people, authentically include people with disabilities in your advertising space, you're literally only focusing on half of your customer base, right?
That's right.
And how lucrative would that be if you were to only cater to whatever, you know, one population, right? That would not be good for your pocketbook in the end, right?
Yeah.
We're going to have a little quick break.
Sure.
Excuse me. And after the break, we're going to have a few more questions and a wrap up. And I got to do a little bit of advertising before we jump back in. Okay.
problems.
All right, so give me a second here, Lisa. If you're enjoying this conversation, join our Patreon community for exclusive content and resources. Choose between our Serene Waters tier at $39.97 or Empowering Wave tier at $99.97. Back to our show. Future of inclusive business. As someone transforming disability representation, what's your vision for the future of inclusive business, Lisa?
So much. I would love to see, from an advertising point of view, I would love to see the representation of disability increased and improved. So the number of people with disabilities on screen increased, but also the number of people behind the camera with disabilities increased. So that, yes, of course, it's one thing to just plonk a wheelchair in front of the camera, but that representation needs to be authentic. The casting needs to be authentic, and the actions, and there's so much that goes into it. From just to give your listeners some background, I used to be a copywriter in advertising agencies. I wrote scripts, I made ads. That was my life for years. I loved it, absolutely loved it prior to acquiring my disabilities. So I know what goes into that. And now that I have my disabilities, I can see things from both sides of the coin, and trying to get that authentic representation of disability into the advertising industry is what I want to champion, but it needs to be from both sides of the coin. It's not as simple as just putting one person in a wheelchair or with a prosthetic limb in front of the camera. But from a business point of view, getting more people with disabilities in the workforce as well, because it needs to be a holistic approach. It's
Right.
not simply about advertising or marketing. We need to be employed as well.
Gotcha. As a follow-up, what practical steps can entrepreneurs or small business owners take to create authentic representations? What practical steps can they take to make that happen?
Okay.
Or at least to get started in that direction?
Sure. Start by speaking to people. Firstly, just do it. There's no reason, like 20 years ago when I was sitting in an advertising agency Googling disabled talent or looking for people with disabilities to put in ads, there were no talent, or in Australia, there were no talent agencies, there were no models and actors and things like that. But now there are so many, and I'm not sure what it's like for you over in Canada, but I know there are certainly a lot in the States. There's certainly talent out there. So there's really no excuses these days. And a good example would be if you have a group shot, say, just for an example, 5 people sitting at a table. There's no reason why one of those people can't be someone with a disability or more. So just do it. Second of all, don't forget to consult with the disability community if you have any questions. There's nothing wrong with asking. It's much better to ask and go, hey, I just want you, is this going to be a problem? Is this authentic? Rather than get called out on social media and cancelled as a result. But don't forget to pay the person with a disability rather than, just want to ask you a question, just want to pick your brain, just want to, because people with a disability are valued employees and valued people as well, and need to be paid for their efforts.
Yeah. And are quite tired of getting treated like they're less than.
Exactly.
So.
And I suppose also make the representation authentic to your brand, and make it authentic to the scene. So, and this is where consulting someone with a disability is really, really key. And you asked me before, the worst example I've seen of disability in advertising. And I remember once someone sent me a script and it opened a wheelchair in the middle of a beach. And anyone who doesn't use a wheelchair knows that sand and wheelchairs are like kryptonite. They just don't go together. You cannot use a wheelchair on sand. And I was like, you can't do that. You just cannot do that. And if the scriptwriter or the advertising agency had only asked someone with a disability to consult on that first up, the production never would have gone ahead. It would have saved so much time, effort, and money, but that never happened. So make it authentic to the brand and make it something that's not really cringy and tokenistic. So that would be another suggestion for your listeners as well.
Beautiful. Excellent. I can't imagine. But a lot of municipalities now, here anyway, don't know about Australia, but here in Canada, or at least in Ontario, a lot of municipalities are investing in beach mats, beach, like a big,
Absolutely. You can do that.
Walkway that rolls out,
Yeah, that's totally doable. So that's a way they could have gone around it, is sort of beach mat beside it, or absolutely.
Yeah. Beautiful. What let's get a little bit personal here. How do you balance education, because I know that you're always sucking it up all the time, with your professional boundaries? How do you balance the two?
In what way do you mean? I'm happy to get personal and nut it out. I'm just trying to answer your question properly. In what way do you mean?
Well, I guess we're gonna need to edit this part of the video. Yeah, I think I'm gonna skip that question. Skip that question, because I agree with you. I'm not exactly sure what she's getting at.
Okay.
This is a good one here. It's better. So tell me, Lisa, what emerging trends should entrepreneurs watch for?
Unfortunately, there is an emerging trend that it started a little while ago, but there's a certain orange man over in the US who will remain nameless, who is rolling back DEI programs and things like that. So I think you know where I'm going with this. And regardless of your political views, this is not about that. But I've seen a little bit of commentary coming out around DEI rolling back here in Australia and things like that. And there's this idea that all diversity is equal, quote unquote. And disability is not trans rights, is not religious rights, is not this, is not this. It's not all the same thing. Yes, it's all human rights, but I've seen this pushback generally against all DEI, and that bothers me a lot. I first noticed this a couple of years ago when I was doing some work around the disability reporting handbook that were released by Media Diversity Australia. And some people were asking me at the time, do you think this diversity thing is just a fad, just a trend? And I was horrified because I'm like, what are you talking about? This disability fad is not just something that I get up every morning and choose whether or not I'll throw on and wear, like a jacket or a necklace. It's part of it. It's my identity. It's not a decision. It's with me 365 days a year, 24/7, as it is for every person with a disability. Obviously, some days it's better or worse, things flare up, but it's with us always. It's not a fad or a trend. And so this idea that disability inclusion can be rolled back or just forgotten about and put on the back heap for a while is concerning.
I agree. I've been aware of the same growing trend. Starting in the states,
Yeah.
most particularly the southern states. I've been horrified myself. It's not just disability rights that are disappearing. It's other women's rights and disappearing, and it's very scary. I'm just as alarmed as you are, Lisa. Yeah, it is a growing trend. And fortunately, so far, knock on wood, I've not heard a lot about that same trend in Canada. I'm sure that it's creeping into our corporate, but I've not seen a lot of evidence myself personally yet.
I know that from everyone I've spoken to, Australian news doesn't reach everyone over there nearly as much as the US news and the world news reaches us. I just watched wall-to-wall US election coverage and everything else, US news. It reaches us non-stop over here. It's all we see. But we had a federal election recently, a state election, and nobody knew about it. We have really big things happen over here all the time, but nobody really hears about it. So I don't think much Australian news really gets out everywhere else. But we're always hearing what's happening over there.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I understand. I grew up in a border town in Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit, Michigan was directly across the water. And it was like closer to go to Detroit than it was to go the other end of town in Windsor, the city of Windsor. And so, yeah, we had a huge US influence on our television and radio when I was growing up. Yeah. Even though I was Canadian, I grew up listening to all this US news and music. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that is not a good trend. We'll watch for some, resistance. To have seen a couple of days ago that all of the Canadian premiers went to the White House together. It's the first time we've ever seen all of the premiers together in one place before, and the one thing that the gentleman that you talked about earlier in Orange, he has served to galvanize Canadian politicians as a team, by the whole piece around the Canada becoming the 51st state. He's gotten our politicians to stand together, and first time in history, and that's momentous. Yeah, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So I'm looking forward to some solid stance for our peoples. Anyways, thank you so much for opening that conversation, Lisa. Thank you so much for being here. And that's it for today. Thanks for listening. And yes, a huge thank you to Lisa for sharing her insights. And remember, disability comes with ability. Thanks so much for listening or for watching. And we look forward to, and before we go, Lisa, where can people find you and connect with you? Are you interested in sharing some contact information?
Oh, I spend most of my time on LinkedIn and Instagram these days. Everything's all the links are on my website, lisacox.co, LISACOX.co. My Instagram handle is the same, or just Lisa Cox on LinkedIn.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lisa. It's been wonderful having you. All right. Until our next episode, remember, your health challenges aren't limitations. They're your business advantage. This episode will be available exclusively on Patreon platform in February 2025. Thanks so much.